Hi guys, Doc T here. Today we are going to make a batch of kombucha. Things you're going to need. You are going to need a starter, which consists of, if you're going to make 1 gallon, and we'll assume you're making 1 gallon, you're going to need 2 cups of kombucha, and you're going to need a SCOBY. A SCOBY is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. That's the thing that turns sweetened iced tea into kombucha. You can buy those online, or if you know somebody who is making kombucha, you can get a SCOBY from them, because it just keeps growing and it gets to the point before too long where people are glad to get rid of them because there's nothing to do with them after a while. So what we're going to do today is, I've got a batch of kombucha. I'm going to prepare another batch from that, and I'm going to go ahead and bottle that and show you the way that I do things. What I've already done is created some tea, brewed up some tea to use as a starter, and let's get started with it. So the first thing you need to do is you need to set aside, for 1 gallon, you need to set aside 2 cups of kombucha. So one of the things that I do, I've got in the sink here, I've got a mixture of sanitizer that sanitizes my equipment, and I like to use it just because when I first started out, I was one of those rare people. They say it doesn't happen to you, but I was one of the people that ended up with mold on my kombucha, and so I make a point of keeping everything clean. I've already run my bottles through it. I've run my next jug through it, and everything is ready to go. So what I'm doing is I'm just setting aside 2 cups of the kombucha that's ready to go. And the reason you use those 2 cups, you've got to, when you make the iced tea, it doesn't have an acidic level that's correct for keeping bad bacteria from growing. So what you do with those first 2 cups of kombucha, that's actually the last thing that goes in, is you set those aside. That will change the acidity so that the bad bacteria won't grow. So I'm going to go ahead and take the tea bag out of here. And I'm going to put 1 gallon of tea and water, a combined total of 1 gallon. So I'm going to take out that tea bag that has been brewing. Now, the way that I did this, I recorded it earlier. So there's 1 cup of sugar to, I used a family size tea bag, or if you're using just the regular size tea bags, you would use 8 of those to get that strength. So what I want to do is I want to add a total of 1 gallon, 1 gallon of combined tea and water to the container that I'm going to make my kombucha in. So there's a ½ gallon. And I find these ½ mason jars or ball jars, whatever the brand you use, are excellent tools to have when you're making kombucha. And so I use them a lot. Now the key is, you do not want to add the SCOBY or the kombucha to water that's above 80 degrees. So what you want to do is make your tea a couple hours before you're ready to make your kombucha, so that it's had a chance to cool down to room temperature. Now, I haven't ever made it in the winter, so I don't know. They say if it gets too cold or too hot, it's not going to make well. But if your area that you're brewing it in is in the 70-degree range, 70 to 80 degrees, then you're going to be okay. So I've got my sweetened iced tea in here, 1 gallon of that. And then what I need to do is I need to add the SCOBY and the existing kombucha to that. And so that part is actually pretty easy. So I'm going to go ahead and, you can do this sort of in either order. What you'll find is that your SCOBY, as it grows in layers. So as you grow it, and I don't need that extra SCOBY, so I'm just going to set that aside. It grows in layers, so you can sort of take off the top layer and put it in there, and I don't need two of these. So you put it in there, and it may float, it may sink. That's not important. What is important is that the next one is going to form on the top of your tea. So I'm just gonna help this along a little bit to sort of smooth it out. And it's gonna do what it's gonna do, but as it does its thing, it creates gases, and that tends to force that up. So what that does is it creates a layer on the top that holds the SCOBY formed at the top, and it seals out any bad bacteria from getting into your thing. So what I like to use, it's got to be exposed to air, but you don't want bugs and stuff getting in there. So what I do is I use 2 of these coffee filters, and I put that on top of my jar, and then I use a rubber band, double up large rubber band, just to make that seal. And then I'll set this aside, and what I do is I set it in a warm place with the top exposed. You don't want to put it in front of the sun. You don't want to put it in a windy place, because those are things that will affect it negatively. So you just set that aside. I've got a special place that I set it aside, and I let it sit there. After about 5 days, I'll start tasting it. Now, I've gotten to where I like to use these 2-gallon jugs that have the spigot on, because that will allow me to taste it without opening up the top. So I can start tasting it after about 5 days. Start tasting it. You'll learn to figure out what level of acidity you like, because what this is going to do, it's going to go from tasting like sweet tea right now to tasting, if you let it go long enough, it's going to taste sort of like a vinegary thing. So it's going through that process of changing from sweet tea to vinegar, and you decide how vinegary you want it. I like mine less vinegary than some other people, but what it's doing is that SCOBY is creating probiotics that are really healthy for your system, supposedly. You know, kind of get that gut bacteria good and healthy, and that's why we drink kombucha, besides which it's really tasty. So I'm going to set that aside, and then in 5 days I'll start tasting it. The nice thing about these jugs is I can make a 1-gallon batch, or I can make a 2-gallon batch, depending upon how much I want to have going. And I have had as much as 4 gallons going at once when I wanted to sort of build up a supply. Now, my favorite way to bottle this is into the same kind of beer bottles that you would use to bottle homemade beer. The same kind of bottles, the caps, that's available to purchase. It's really handy. You can throw it in the refrigerator when it's ready, and it's ready to take out. But because this is going from sweetened iced tea to sort of a vinegary sort of flavor, what I like to do, and a lot of people do this, is to flavor in some way. So you can add berries, you can add this, that, the other thing. What I've settled into at this point is I like to use a combination of lemon and honey. So I've got a 1-gallon batch here. So what I need to do is create a batch of flavoring that will go into mine. So I'm going to add some extra honey, and that will give it a sugar for that to eat on. And I'm going to add some lemon. So I'm going to add one-half cup of lemon, and then I'm going to add about a 1/2 cup of honey, and then I'll stir that up and I'll add it to there. And what giving the honey will do is that will give it access to sugar, so that can continue to grow, because that sugar is what the kombucha grows off of. Now, this is not the same as sugar, obviously, honey, but this gives it something to eat on, because what it's going to do, it's the same process of fermenting, because that's what it is. It's fermented tea. It's the same process of fermenting beer or anything like that. You add ingredients, you add a culture that will eat those ingredients, and then what it does is it creates carbon dioxide. And so when you're talking about a carbonated drink, that's what you've got. It's carbon dioxide in there. And so by putting this into my finished kombucha, or almost my brewed kombucha, what that will do is it will give it more sugar to eat, because that's what it needs to make that carbon dioxide. I'll put the tea into the bottle, the kombucha into the bottle, and as it eats the honey that's been added to it, that will create carbon dioxide, and that will, as long as the lid's on here tight, that will carbonate my kombucha and give me a nice fizzy finish. And that's the way that I like it. So I've got the mixture here. I'll just pour it right into the thing here, and normally you'll see it fizz up a bit. You might be able to see that right now. It's starting to fizz up as the kombucha interacts with the new sugar and the lemon. And then what I do, this is another nice thing about having the spigot, is I can go ahead and bottle that by just opening the spigot and pouring it right into the bottle. Now the way that I like to fill these, I like to get a consistent fill, and I like to fill it just a little bit above the bend in the bottle. Then what I'll do is I'll set it aside for 3 days at room temperature, the same place where I'm brewing my SCOBY. I'll set it aside for 3 days, and that will give it time to continue to grow. That's what will carbonate it. So I'll take and add a lid to that. After 3 days, you'll be able to come to these plastic bottles and you'll feel it get tight. And so then after those 3 days, I'll take and I'll put it into the refrigerator so that it stops growing. It deactivates the SCOBY that's in there. And then it's there in the refrigerator, ready for you to drink. I like to drink mine over ice. I love the fizzy, sort of slightly tart, slightly sweet flavor of it. And the probiotics in it are good for your gut. And so, depending upon how much you make, get a handful of bottles. If you don't have enough bottles, that's another time when I will use one of these half-gallon jars, and I'll use one of these replaceable lids, and I will put it in there and just go into the fridge, and then you can pour out a glass or two or whatever. So that is how I make kombucha. Not a hard process. The hardest process is just making sure that you've got a SCOBY, you've got a starter, and then making sure that everything is clean. And other than that, you want to make sure that this has the ability to breathe. So you don't want to put a hard lid that won't let it breathe, or it's not going to work. And then you bottle it, you drink it, share it with your friends. That's all I've got for today. You've been putting up kombucha with Doc T. I'll talk to you later. Peace.